Nice analysis, and I'm going to pass at least a microphone over to Kirk Spano so we can find out what his thoughts are on the ground in Iran. He predicted a lot of these things that are happening, so really a pleasure and great timing to have you with us, Kirk. Waiting to hear your voice.
Hey, can you hear me, Dale?
Yeah, Kirk, how are you, buddy? Happy New Year.
I'm good. I'm good.
Happy New Year. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. I was enjoying the conversation about pretty faces, nice bodies, and candlesticks.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like what we were talking about yesterday afternoon. So,
yeah, right,
yeah,
right.
You know, first of all, Kirk, I'd like to acknowledge that, you know, way ahead of the curve you were with things beginning to percolate in Iran. You talked about the potential of some type of conflict well before President Trump decertified the deal, and I think there's another deadline looming about that. But this is something new that has generated on the ground, unlike other protests and unrest on the streets that mainly happen with the elite in Tehran. This is happening countrywide, the whole nation, more from the working class people, kind of like a nationalistic, they're fed up. So you told me that you wrote a piece, and it's entitled, I believe, "The End of the Ayatollahs." So I'd be interested in, you know, where your head is at, where we're at in this process. How long do you expect this to take place? And then last of all, could the revolution be a reason for Iran to want to get into a shooting war? It's one way to distract the population from, you know, their standard of living when the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right, right. Okay, so first off,
buddy,
yeah, it's a lot of stuff, but it's organizable.
Okay.
First off, am I able to share my screen at all?
Oh yeah. See, I wasn't sure because you said you were going to do it on the phone. I'm going to give you the screen. Definitely. Hold on a second.
All right. I'll just pop up the series of articles that I wrote.
Okay. Here you go. Here's the screen share.
All right. Show my screen. And I think this should do it.
Yeah, we got it.
You see that? Okay.
Okay, so this was last fall.
Yeah, so, you know, I've been on the oil markets, obviously, in the Middle East for a long time. I actually started studying the Middle East in the late 80s, early 90s. So I've been, and as a formative experience, you know, I was a kid when the whole Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution occurred. And I remember, you know, the hostages and everything else. So in college, I studied the Middle East, particularly with Iran, because Iran has an actually a wonderful history.
Oh yeah, the Persian Empire, unbelievable.
Yeah, and even more recently than that. But you know, the Islamic Revolution.
They were Aryans.
Right, right. You know, so anybody he liked, right? But you know, the reality in the last I guess it would be 47 years now, is that the United States has wanted to get rid of the Ayatollahs, the Ayatollah and the mullahs. And I think under President Trump, that's one of his primary goals. He hates what's going on over there. I think he actually understands that for there to be stability in the Middle East, you have to get rid of some of the non-secular, you know, some of the religious motivations. And in my opinion, a lot of the religious motivations are just shields and tools for controlling wealth and controlling people. So what's new about this uprising in Iran is that, as I predicted, the people are getting tired of the religious authoritarianism, and that's really what it is. It's authoritarianism. So,
Kirk,
you know,
it's one of the reasons. You know, I have a little awareness of the country that they have a very young population.
Right.
And they can't drink, but they could travel a few hours to go to different resorts and live more of a Western lifestyle. So is the demographic really kind of the catalyst that's making this happen now?
It is clearly part of the reason, right? So they have, because of technology, we overlook how pervasive technology is at this point because it's become so normal to us. But if you're in Iran or China or anywhere where there's an authoritarian tilt and you want to get information from the outside world, it's much easier to do today than 20, 30 years ago. So the repression of ideas is incredibly hard now.
Right, great point.
And the younger people see the way people live in Europe or the United States or Canada and other parts of the world, and they go, well, why can't we do that? Why can't I walk down the street and hold my girl's hand? And they are getting to the point where, this is the first time that they've actually not just asked for reforms, right? This wasn't just economic. It was spurred by some economic complaints. Interestingly, not from folks in the city who are usually the ones that step up, but in the countryside and at the edges, people saying, hey, financially we're not doing so well, economically we're not doing so well, what's going on? And that morphed into a broader sense of a broader type of protest, and there was actually calls for the Ayatollah to be gone. So we are at the front end of some major shifts. And if you take a look at Saudi Arabia, they sort of are leading this with Prince bin Salman, Mohammed bin Salman, who I wrote an article somewhere in here. If you go to my Seeking Alpha page, I've got quite a bit out there. But I talked about, they call him Prince MBS. Yeah, they call him Prince MBS. I thought he was going to be Man of the Year. So, the person of the year and the movement was, the anti-sexual abuse movement came in for person of the year. But, Prince Mohammed bin Salman's changing the world, and, I don't think people should overlook that. He has, in Saudi Arabia, allowed women to drive. And he's allowing women into the workplace, and he's making it a more secular, less religious place. He's getting rid of the enforcement squads, and I think that these Wahhabi schools are real close to being gone. So he's changing things in Saudi Arabia, which is also young, and people in Iran are taking notice. So I would think that the folks in Iran and the folks in Saudi Arabia, they might find a newfound détente, at least, because they have a lot of things in common at the generational level. It's some of the old folks who have been the problem. And when in history have the old folks been the problem?
The youth of Saudi Arabia, Kirk, the youth of Saudi Arabia and the youth in Iran don't care if you're a Shiite or a Sunni. They see it more as a generational bond that they have. And it's the older generation that makes a religious distinction.
Right. It's definitely moving in that direction. I mean, you can't paint it with too general a brush, but it's clear that it's moving in that generation, in that direction. So what does that mean to us as investors and as citizens of the world? Well, the first thing it should mean to us as citizens of the world is that we ought to support this move if we have any brains, because for whatever it is, 1,400 years, that part of the world has just been on fire. And at some point, the weapons get so big. We've got North Korea with nuclear weapons, and the reality is that Iran is a baby step away from having them if they want. And chemical weapons and biological weapons and terrorist networks. We have to get by this at some point, and the speculation and the planning has been for a very long time, because I was reading about it in the early 90s, that you want to have a conflict, because they're not going to decide just to change. especially from the top down. Now, from the bottom up, what they want is change, but from the top down, they don't. So, unfortunately, the people at the top, the Ayatollah, the mullahs, they control the military. So you have to get an uprising, and it has to be supported from the outside, which is what I've said all along, is that at some point, Israel, the United States have to step up and help the folks in Iran. Saudi Arabia has to have some sort of conciliatory role. Russia's going to want to have a role. And I have openly said I think Russia will take a step back before they take a step up if there's a conflict within or with Iran. And I think the shooting war is a two-level thing. I don't think you see an invasion by Israel or the United States. I think what you see is support for an uprising. So if these uprisings continue, you could see the United States and Israel target, the Iranian National Guard and disable them, allowing the protests to take a more absolute form where they overthrow the Ayatollah and the mullahs and potentially kill them, for sure replace the government. So I think that the day is coming.
You really think the Ayatollah and the Revolutionary Guard are going to stand by and let this alliance basically create a regime change without being aggressive and just letting it happen? So is it possible that by supporting the uprising, that's what leads to a shooting war?
Yeah, I think absolutely, right?
Okay.
So, the Revolutionary Guard is throughout the Middle East at this point. They're very stretched. The United States and Israel, our military is so strong and so fast, and I don't think people understand the fast part of it. Our ability to have strikes quickly, it's not like we have to go out and do intelligence brand new. Oh, hey, I heard the Iranians are a problem. Let's do some intelligence. We know where almost all of their people and resources are right now. So if the day comes where we want to fire 1,000 missiles and have sorties of jets flying and Black Hawk helicopters, it's not a thing that is going to take long to prepare. And I will tell you, I know for certain that there have been orders since July to prepare for this conflict. So the United States military and Israel is always prepared, but the United States military has been preparing for this.
How do you know that since July?
I hang out on the East Coast with some people who know some people.
Okay. You're like Deep Throat in F.A.C.E. All right, go ahead.
They can't discuss their specific missions, but they can tell you what part of the world they're going to, and it's not hard to figure out from there, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Majid Mazat in here says he's from the Middle East and up to date with the politics, and what you wrote is 100% true. So for people that are on the ground there, they're giving you a thumbs up on your interpretation of what's happening here in our community.
Yeah, so the article that I'm writing today should be out tomorrow, is titled The Brutal End of the Ayatollah. Something along those lines. I'll probably throw the word recession in, because by extension of what's coming, we're going to probably get higher oil prices, which we've talked about before.
Right.
Higher oil prices.
How high during the uprising, and if it's going to take the shooting war? The market's already starting to put in some risk premium, don't you think now,
right.
Kirk?
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, and I wrote this article with a little bit of your help. Oil's technical path to $80. I think that's a done deal. I think that we will see $80 quite possibly by summertime, even without an expanded conflict. I mean, we may see things simmer here for a year or two, but what we talked about in the last interview is I said that I think springtime is a very likely time for something to happen. And with what just happened over the new year, yeah, that's starting to look like it might be right. So we'll see. But even the simmering adds to the price of oil heading towards 80, which makes the cash flow of some of the oil companies I've talked about remarkable, right? They go, because they spent 4 years now, 4 years now getting lean because of the pressure, and now all of a sudden they're going to get $80 oil again. You know, you take a look at some of the companies I'm going to be in, I mean, their cash flows are going to be just enormous. So if there's an actual war that displaces supply in the Middle East, you know, you've got certain analysts, you know, guys who sensationally sell investment letters, and I have an investment letter. I don't hype when I talk about things. I just try to make sense to people. I don't think we're going to see oil at $300 or $400 or $500 a barrel, which is what some of the other idiots, you know, are saying. Could we see $120, $130, $140 oil for a year or two? Absolutely. If we knock 2 or 3 million barrels a day offline because we blow up some pipelines, some infrastructure, you know, then that has to be rebuilt. It takes a few years, but it's Western companies coming in there to rebuild. You know, the French can say whatever they want, but about us being aggressive, but the reality is that Total goes in there and cuts deals. So, you know, they can have their opinion about, oh, the United States is being aggressive. You know what? The Ayatollah has been aggressive for a very long time. He has to go. And I just don't even like to argue the point anymore. Anybody who doesn't think the Ayatollah has to go just doesn't understand the roots of most of the terrorist conflict and threat that's gone on for the last 40 years. So let's just presume that's going to happen. You get some verbal pushback from Europe, but then they turn around and send Royal Dutch Shell and Total into Iran to rebuild everything. They get money out of the deal. Our oil companies make money on the deal. The Iranian people have a better life. You know, there's just not much downside other than the fact that obviously people will die. And, you know, I hate to say that at some point we have to accept the costs of beneficial revolution, but at some point we have to accept the costs of beneficial revolution. We had one here. So I think that the day is coming in Iran. I have friends who are dissidents. I just can't see things progressing slower than they have. I think it's going to accelerate, and at some point, at a minimum, you get a risk premium, and more likely than not, you get a little bit of infrastructure blown up. And I'll just come out and call a spade, and I'm sure we'll do it on purpose, or the Israelis or Russians, somebody will do it on purpose, you know, because they know that the price of oil going higher is good for Russia, the United States, and Israel in the short term. It will cause a recession. There's no doubt about that either. But in the short term, there are some interests that are very pro more expensive oil. In the long run, and I was just on television.
I mean, look how many wars have actually that's been the catalyst.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying it's ethical. I'm just saying it is.
Right.
And you know, I get yelled at and called a warmonger. I'm not a warmonger. I'm an analyst. I'm just saying this is the way it's probably going to go. And you know, you have to separate your ideology and emotions from this analysis. So ultimately, you know, I did talk about the rise of electric vehicles and a smart grid and alternative energy. Higher oil prices will spur that on, right? So we'll go through this period of higher oil prices, recession, and then people will say, hey, maybe now that the EV technology is better, the solar technology is better, and as they build out a smarter grid, you know, I want to be involved in that. So if you look at all of these things over 20 and 30 years rather than 20 and 30 minutes, you can see that there is a flow here. And there are certain catalysts around the world. The rise of technology, a more secular society, China becoming more mature, India, which is a young economy, accelerating. Take a look at these big macro pictures, and you can figure out that, hey, there are a lot of good things going on. You know, I do have an article where I think the link is right in here. So last year I had a blowout year. You know, made a good return, 48%.
Nice. Congratulations, Kirk.
Yeah, no, it's, you know, you like to have those years. Somewhere in this article, I have a link to, I don't know, it's in here somewhere. I have a strategy called Core 4, and it's how I do things. And how I do things, maybe it might be in the blog posts. Yeah, here's how I beat. Yeah, there you go. You know, as a writer and a publisher, you got to write some clever titles. So, you know, I have this Core 4 investing method, and it's a pretty simple thing. Is you take a look at the big macro picture, and you figure out, okay, the big macro, and you guys are currency traders, so you do this all the time. You take a look at the macro picture, and you say, okay, these are the galaxies I want to play in. Then you figure out what the governments and the central banks are doing. In this case, we have government action. Then, by extension, if we know an Iran war is coming, we can start picking out companies and investments. And then finally, as you talked about with your last guest, we figure out what the price trends are, right? Because while our analysis can be pretty accurate, precision is remarkably hard, right? We can get the big picture right, but getting the trade right is really hard. And that's where the price trend following, in technical analysis, quant, and I use quant, you figure it out from there. So I'm just trying to throw out to, in your group's case, traders, you should be looking at some of these catalysts and saying, okay, I know what way the big picture is going. So I can trade within this little galaxy, big galaxy, because it is very impactful. And I know that there's a flow, there's a tailwind at my back. So even if I goof up a trade, I might get, you know, partially or fully bailed out just because I was going with the flow to begin with.
Great point. That's
and I think, right, you know, I mean, why would you trade against the market unless you're really trying to hit a home run? You know, I'm about risk management. You know, my service is called margin of safety investing, and I made 48% with 31% in cash last year. So, you know, my risk adjusted return, I don't even know what that turns into, but you try to manage risk by understanding all these things. And folks who don't understand that there is another, you know, it won't be an Arab Spring because the Iranians aren't Arab, but there's another spring coming in the Middle East, and it'll be better than the last one. Could it be more violent? I think it could be. That's what I'm writing about today for publication tomorrow. But the opportunity for an investor who's willing to be an analyst and be emotionally controlled in these trades, you know, you can make a ton of money. I made 48% on the retail side. You know how hard it is to make 48% on the retail side? Because I can't take the level of risk or the, you know, the concentration that normally is required to do that. So, you know, you guys can take some more risk, you know, especially through concentration of your trades, and make a lot more money. You know, for example, I own leaps on several oil stocks.
You think there's an outcome for the dollar, since that's our wheelhouse? I've had people on that said that, you know, it's possible that the Saudis de-link from the petrocurrency, but in your scenario, it sounds like we're solidifying the alliance rather than the other way. So do you have a view on the dollar with this going on?
Okay, so the petrodollar is something that I focused on for a few years since I was at MarketWatch. And I believe that the dollar will be the strongest currency on average for the rest of my life. No other nation has our combination of economic diversity, global diplomatic reach, military strength. You know, the dollar deserves to be the strongest currency on the planet. We have devalued it by borrowing, and that is the only thing that has kept the dollar from being as strong as, say, the Swiss franc. What's coming is that Saudi Arabia won't completely get rid of the petrodollar, but they are going to allow the Chinese to start trading more oil in dollars, or excuse me, in yuan.
Yeah.
But the thing is do people really start to trust China as much as the United States? Maybe over 20, 30, 40 years, but it's not going to be quick. So the dollar is going to have this range that it trades in, and it's not going to crash. It's not going to be who's that guy that runs around selling books about the end of the dollar?
John Rubino?
No. The Rickards.
Oh, Jim Rickards, yes.
Yeah, and I get what he's talking about, but some people who have an opinion and then form their evidence around the opinion usually miss something. And what people who are dollar bears miss is that the dollar will go through bearish trends. Don't get me wrong. There's a lack of confidence. Yeah, there's a lack of confidence in President Trump, rightly or wrongly. I'm not going to talk about that, but the dollar's getting beat up a little bit. The reality is that on average, over a long period of time, the dollar will be very strong. If I'm right, and I think that there's possibility I am, I think the dollar goes in the direction of being very strong 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years out. There's going to be another huge dollar rally, and Jim Rogers has talked about this, and maybe it might be sooner. We'll get a spike if there's a conflict. We'll get that must mean the market's open. We'll get a spike on conflict, right? People will have their flight to safety. But eventually, I think the United States can become a gigantic Switzerland when it comes to currency. And in the long run, that will be important as the global economy matures even further. That's a long process, right? So the glide path will be choppy early and then upwards after that. So for traders, maybe for years and years, they can trade the dollar and just make a ton of money. You have to understand the pivot points, what you're working against, but then understand that the long-term trend is up. The dollar will be the strongest currency on the planet for a very, very long time on average. However, it'll have a range and it'll be tradable. So, go ahead and trade it, but just understand that your bullish trades have more of a likelihood of getting bailed out than your bearish trades.
Okay, Kirk. What a great interview, and thank you so much. I know you're on vacation for coming in today, and
I'm not on vacation. I just I just spent a little bit of time of organizing my personal life over the holidays.
Oh, but, my God. You have to do that too. I mean, investing what we do, not who we are, right? So, okay, I really appreciate it, Kirk. Eye-opening again, and I have to tip my hat to you that you had a pulse and insight into what was going to happen before things started percolating on the oven. So appreciate you edifying our community, buddy. And
thanks a lot. And if folks can jump out there and check out the articles that I have at Seeking Alpha, I always appreciate the follow me on Seeking Alpha.
Right.
I know you follow me, and we follow each other over there on Twitter.
Right.
If you follow me at Seeking Alpha on Twitter, we're good.
Yeah. At Kirk Spano. Follow him so that you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the Middle East. You're my go-to guy in the Middle East, Kirk, and I appreciate your time today. Happy New Year.
Take it easy, Dale.
All right,
Happy New Year.
All right. That's it, F.A.C.E. Thank you, Patricia, Luca. See everyone tomorrow. Good hunting the rest of the days. Maybe I'll see you guys in the other chat room. Remember, great deals on the subscriptions. You only have till, I believe, Sunday or Monday. So see everyone tomorrow. Good hunting. And most of all, don't just count your pips, count your blessings. And I count being able to collaborate with you and the team as a big blessing in my own life. So thank you. See everyone tomorrow. Thank you, Kirk.
Take care.